Father Raymond De Souza has written extensively on the Church's history with Indigenous tribes of the Americas, and he provided coverage of this historic trip for EWTN in Canada. He joins us now to give us more context for the Pope's visit. Father De Souza, thank you so much for being with us. You wrote in the National Catholic Register about the division among Catholics on how much is enough and when will this be over? Two phrases that you put together related to the papal apology and restoration for Indigenous communities. Is this dynamic surprising? What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that in Canada, this issue has been for 30 years now, more or less a prominent issue, and the last year, a very prominent and conflicted issue. So a lot of people brought to this visit of the Holy Father some suspicions, some even resentments, and also goodwill on the part of many. I mean, there was a mixture of things. I think that there were some voices who thought, well, should this be done? There were apologies offered before. We're tired of it, that kind of thing. And both the bishops of Canada and the Holy Father thought this would be a necessary thing. It can be a humbling thing to ask forgiveness, but they both were keen, that is the bishops and the Holy Father, to say that this is part of traditional Catholic practice, and especially St. John Paul emphasized it as part of the Great Jubilee. And in a certain sense, the gospel encourages not to put a limit on the grace of forgiveness and the grace of mercy. And that's really what the Holy Father wanted to emphasize. And I think he addressed those concerns from people who were a little frustrated, perhaps, or suspicious. If they took time to listen carefully to what he said, I think they would have been satisfied.
And he had some really important insights, as you said, that bring together the three pontificates that have dealt with this, apologized for it, and done their best to be pastoral, but also to bring us home on this issue. Tell us about then the impact of that moment of silence at the graves in Alberta.
So the site that he went to visit, first of all, on that Monday morning, his first official visit, was to a place where four Indigenous tribes they come together in that place. And the cemetery there it's the common cemetery of that place. There was a residential school, Indian boarding school, on that site. It's long been torn down. And so it's likely that some of the children who went to the school due to negligence, perhaps, or even just simple disease and lack of good hygiene, and say 100 years ago, may have died, would have been buried there. So there was in 2021 a massive international controversy about supposed grave sites. Sometimes people misreported it as being mass graves or massacres. That never happened. And the Indigenous peoples of Canada never said it happened, but there was a lot of confusion about that. And so visiting a grave site was a healing gesture. To pray for the dead is always a good thing, but to pray for the dead in that place would have included, in a powerful visual symbol, those children who did go to the schools, and because they died of tuberculosis and weren't returned home, or because they may have even died of lack of sanitation or nutrition because the schools, which were funded by the government, were underfunded. Praying for them, or praying for all the dead in that place, included them, and I think that was very important.
And this is a really important point that the Holy Father tried to hammer home, the relationship between the church and the state. I know that he talked about something called ideological colonization and the dangers of ideological colonization. It's a very, very important term that he coined. What did he mean by that? Can you explain that to us?
When the church gets too close to the state, sometimes abuses can creep in.
That's
not
right.
not just in abuses of individuals, but in cooperating with systems that can be, as he said, deplorable. So he held up here, for example, the model of St. Francois de Laval, Canada's first bishop, who was courageous enough to speak against, in his case, the French colonial authorities in defense of the Indigenous peoples. Many people were not courageous enough to do that. So it's a mixed record. And he came specifically to ask forgiveness for the dark parts, the shadows of that.
Right.
Having condemned that is the participation in colonial excesses, he said, look, let's not think of ourselves as this is only part of the past. He said, there's a same a similar colonial mentality today where rich countries, and this would include very much Canada's federal government and the United States federal government, look at poor people across the world. And although they don't wish to go and conquer their countries and make them colonies anymore, they may, as a condition, for example, of foreign aid or as a condition of security guarantees, force those countries to adopt in a certain kind of odd sort of evangelization, the, say, secular liberal preferences.
Secular ideology.
Of the government of Canada or the government of the United States. So he said, if you want to condemn the excesses and abuses of the colonial mentality of the 18th century and 19th century, fine, but don't think that you're immune from that. And today, in the 21st century, there's this same process going on, and he calls it ideological colonization.
Really quickly, Father De Souza, Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, a Catholic at odds with church teaching on many levels, took a bold step during the papal visit, and he told Pope Francis that the church was not doing enough for the Indigenous community. What is his motive in catching the Pope out?
Well, he didn't say it directly to the Pope, at least maybe privately, but publicly he made those comments. Our Prime Minister, I think it's fair to say, likes to be at the center of attention, even in his speech saying that the former residential school students should be the center of attention. He talked about where he was, where he had gone, and so forth. So he finds it a bit hard, I think, to not be at the center of attention. And we have to be honest, the policy of residential schools was a government policy, government implemented. The religious orders, Catholic and otherwise, Anglican, Protestant, did run the schools, but it was a government policy from start to finish. And to a certain degree, I think the government of Canada finds it easier on such occasions to point the finger at others as a way of distracting attention from its own role. So I think that's probably what was going on there. I should say that the Prime Minister was, I think, less than gracious on some occasions, but our Governor General, who represents the Queen, and many other of the Indigenous leaders, not unanimously, but gave the Holy Father a very warm welcome. So we shouldn't let the Prime Minister's deportment stand in for everybody.
Thank you so much, Father De Souza.
Thank you. God bless you.